Yeah, knowing your why and the purpose behind something is really powerful. I forgot that for a little while, but the why is a very important thing. Planning and setting goals, great. Yeah, planning really helps because it breaks things down. Good. Great. All good things that you guys are sharing for what helps to motivate. So let's go over some of those. And typically, what motivates us? I mean, there's a couple ways of looking at this. One is when we do something, we're either moving towards something that gives us pleasure or away from something that gives us pain or we don't like. Okay? So let's think of our kids. So now we're going to get into our kids' shoes. Okay? Now, if your child is avoiding, think of one thing, because, you know, kids can be avoiding things for different reasons. So get one example, your biggest example that you're challenged with right now with your kiddo, and think to yourself, why would my child be avoiding doing that? And don't say to make my life crazy. And I've said that a lot. So a couple things that I find with kids. I find that kids always want to do their best. It's just sometimes they don't know how to do it, or they don't have the right tools to do it their best. So some of the reasons I see kids avoiding doing something is because they can't do it in the way they want to do it, or they feel they should be able to do it. And it's easier to not do something than to do something and not do it in a way that you feel you should be doing, right? So the kid that's bad at basketball, well, he's not going to go play, he's going to avoid doing it because he's not good, and he doesn't, he doesn't know, even practicing, he just is going to avoid it because I'm not good. So it's going to save him from feeling that pain of failure. Okay. So I see that a lot with our kiddos, especially our kiddos that have developmental challenges, because certain skills are harder for them and doing certain things. So therefore they're going to avoid doing it at all. So I see that. Sometimes I see kids avoiding things because they're overwhelmed. And when I avoid things to overwhelm. You ever add so many things to your to-do list and you just say, I'm done. You just completely get overwhelmed and you just, you just don't do what you need to do because you're overwhelmed. I find that a lot, especially when it comes to motivating with schoolwork. I find overwhelm is a big, big challenge for our kiddos, especially with schoolwork and going to school. Mm-hmm. Great, and I like that. Sometimes they don't understand content and afraid to ask. Great, so not knowing what is expected of them and exactly what they need to do or how to do it. Great, I like that. And asking for help to do it. Very good point. So that may be why they're not doing something. And I come from a background where I really look at sensory systems in our behaviors. And so sometimes people may avoid doing something because of an overactive sensory system. So a child that doesn't want to go to eat in the cafeteria and has a meltdown before lunchtime every day. Well, maybe the noise is so overwhelming and all of the input from the people walking around and the echoes and the chairs scraping on the floors of the linoleum floors. A lot of my kids, that's really overwhelming. So they may want to avoid situations that they find sensory-wise just overwhelming to their nervous system. So I see that a lot. I had one example. My son was working with an aide and she wrote an email to me and she said, he refused to work with me today. I said, okay. So I said, I'll talk to him when he gets home. So I asked him, and he was in kindergarten at this time. And I asked him, I said, why didn't you work with your aide today? And he said, she ate onions, and her breath smelled so bad I couldn't sit next to her because I couldn't take the smell of her breath. So she's thinking he's just being defiant, but he was so overwhelmed by the smell of onions, he couldn't focus. And so that was the only way he knew how to get out of the situation, was to refuse to do something. So our kids, it is a detective job to figure out why they are not doing something. And sometimes we think we know the reason, but it could be completely different. And our kids don't even know why they choose to do something or why they're not choosing to do something. But automatically, as humans, we tend to avoid things that bring us pain or we feel unsafe. So keep that in mind. And we tend to do things, what motivates us to do things is things that bring us pleasure. So video games, we have no problems motivating our kids to play video games, right? Because it brings them pleasure, they enjoy it. And it's not too demanding, right? So things that they like and are good at, you don't have to motivate someone to do something that they like to do or they're good at. So it's mostly things that we're not good at, are difficult, we tend to avoid. So what can we do to help our kids through those things that are difficult, challenging, and we just don't want to do them? So before we go, I'm going to just read a couple of things from the chat. So handwriting is a challenge. Yeah, I find that with a lot of kiddos. Physical pain when he writes. He's probably writing. I find that a lot of kids, when they write, if writing's hard, some kids write really hard because it helps them to write. And if he has pain when he writes it, maybe he's holding that pencil so tight and trying to write that he's just fatiguing. Yeah, and he avoids it. Yeah, you're right. And tolerate certain smells. So avoid the kitchen when you cook onions. Yeah. So, knowing what our kids feel and are feeling is one of the best things. Know their why. We come back to that why. It's so important. If our kids can verbalize, it's so great to have that dialogue when they are refusing to do something. Maybe not in that moment, but dig into that why. Okay. So before we go into the pleasure, I'm going to go right back to the why again. So I'm going to give you another example. So my son this morning completely had a meltdown 10 minutes before the bus was coming because of, I'm sure you all can relate to this, because he didn't have something that he needed to bring to school. And we had to get it ready. And it ended up, we were back and forth and it was very challenging, and he ended up going on the bus. But it was a very stressful 10 minutes. And I didn't know why he was getting so upset. But when he calmed down, he came in, he actually brought me in this little flower and and said, "I'm sorry," and told me why he was stressed, because we really try to work on that why. And he said it's a roller coaster at school. He said the demands, he feels like he's on top of it, and then he gets all of this information from all his teachers and it gets overwhelming, but then he comes down and then he's bored because he's so smart that then he's hearing the material and then he's like, okay, this isn't stimulating me. So it's a roller coaster, and he even used those words, roller coaster, a roller coaster of stress throughout the day. And I want to bet a lot of you are having challenges with motivation around school, whether it's schoolwork, going to school. And so one of the things we can do for our kids is, one, helping them to get to that why, their why. But showing them we care and we want to understand and we're empathetic to their challenges. Because when you're going through a challenge, don't you love to have that friend who just sits and he listens to you, doesn't always try to solve it, but just listens and holds that space and says, yeah, this is rough. Sometimes as parents, we want to solve all our kids' problems. I'm one of those. I'm a problem solver like you. It's a problem, like, all right, but let's get to the solve. Let's get to the solution. But sometimes we need to sit in the problem for a little bit and really get into that why and help them process it before we get into the solving. So it was great today. He just started middle school. So this is a whole new, I'm sure if you guys have older kids, you know, it's a whole new ball game. And so we're working at his level and where he's at to make him feel less stressed and more comfortable with the changes and demands. So knowing the why and being there and listening to our kids. So when our kid says, I don't want to go to school, or I don't want to do this, instead of saying, well, you have to, like, you know, this is the way it is, and let's just go. Or, I don't have time to deal with this, which all of these words I have said, so that's why I'm saying those. If we can give that space and to bring in that empathy and say, I hear you. There are days that I just didn't want to go to school too. And be with them, active listening. Yeah. You know, that I think is one of the first things we can do when we're helping our kids to be motivated to do something they don't want to do. Because if they know we're with them, we feel them, then they're more likely to open up with us to listen to us as we help them through the motivation issues and the challenges, why they're refusing to do something. Okay, so empathy is a big, big thing we can give to our kids. It's a great gift. Active listening, yeah, you're right, and non-judgmentally, you're right, completely, yeah. And it's a skill that takes time. I know, like I said, I'm the thinker and the problem solver. So for me to be able to just listen actively, non-judgment, well, not thinking of all the connections that could be the challenges, just being there is such a great tool for our kiddos. So giving them that space. So let's go into when they shut down and won't say what. And that's the thing. So my son this morning before school, he shut down. Okay. That was not the time to ask him why he was so upset. When we're digging into those whys, he came home, he had time to process it. He came home, we talked about it. If I would have even tried, well, I did actually try a little bit this morning to figure out a solution, you know, it wasn't the moment. So, you know, you're right. And if they cannot communicate how they feel, and that is one thing that I feel is really challenging for our kids, not being able to communicate. When you're trying to get your point across to someone and they are just not getting it, how frustrated do you feel? Our kids who have a hard time communicating, they're frustrated a lot because they really want to be understood. And so those kiddos that cannot communicate how they feel, and clearly see they are stressed. There is a program, so this is kind of going a little bit off the motivation, but I'm going to go off and then I'll come back. Emotional intelligence is a wonderful thing, but very complicated, even for adults. Like, it is hard to understand sometimes how we feel and what we're doing and how it relates to our emotions. But there's a program called, oh my God, now I'm blank. I went off on that and then I needed, oh my gosh, it's a self-right. And I have taught this program for years. Zones Without Regulation, sorry about that. So it's called Zones Without Regulation. And it's a great book and program. I've taught it in schools, many public schools. I used to work in Canada for a little bit, and a lot of the public schools there used this program. And it was great because what it does is it gives children, and they have pictures, so you don't have to read, you know, and it gives pictures when they're 4 different zones, so they can identify when they're in these zones. So you have the blue zone, which is you're tired or sad or don't have much energy. Then the green zone is that optimate state for learning. You're organized, you're focused. Then yellow is you're excited. It could be a good excited, or it could be a little bit stressed, like, oh, okay, things are, which most of my kids that I work with, and including my own, or in the early years, they would like lived in that yellow zone. Okay, where they're just on edge and they're just, they can tip one way or the other. Okay, so a lot of our kids with neurodiversity are in that yellow zone pretty much most of the time. And then you have the red zone, which is, flipping the lid, having a meltdown, and so with kids that are nonverbal, when you're teaching these emotions, first is just teaching the emotion. And then it's when you teach the emotion, because when we're starting to get the yellow, how I use it is once they start to know the zones, when they get into the yellow, it's what can we do to come into the green? And they have menus that show like whether it's deep pressure, whether it's rocking. So they have these great different tools, and the kids can pick which tool works for them to help them come back out of the red or into the green, or if they have low energy, what activities help them to kind of rev up so they're more attentive. So that's a very comprehensive, that's a whole nother topic. We could talk for a while about that. But that's really helpful for our kids when first identifying how they feel, what they can do to feel better before that, why, and the why. So whys are very good. There's also another short course that I teach. It's called the ABCs of stress for children with autism and ADHD. And we go over that ABC, the antecedent, but what's the trigger, what's the behaviors and the consequences of behavior. So that's a course that I do as well that goes a little bit more in depth of that, which is a great tool as well. So I'm going to come back. I'm going to read My Body and Me. Great. Yeah, that's great. So there's a lot of tools out there that teach about our bodies and how we feel. So yeah, and I think it's so important for our kids to understand, because most of the kids with neurodiversity, they're here and they're here. Very few kids are here. They don't listen to those internal cues. There's so much noise out here that they very rarely go inward. That's something I work with as well, is helping kids go inward. And that's a great thing you can do at night to help your kids. When I help them to go to sleep, we kind of go through the different bodies and we relax the different body parts. So there's things you can do with that as well. Okay, so motivation. So we're going to come back to motivating. Well, so let's look at, were there any things that I didn't say or other people put in the chat that you feel maybe reasons why your child does not want to do something, or a child, or even us? So it's hard, avoiding pain, difficult. Anyone want to add? Was that good? I covered them all. Okay. All right. So we're going to go on the assumption that most of the time our kids avoid something because they don't know how to do it, or it's too difficult. Okay. And so how do we help them through that? Well, depending on the age of the child, how, the verbal skills, what we can do is we can try to break things down to make it easier for them. Especially for those kids that are avoiding things because they're overwhelmed. We can start pulling out things like homework time. My son, the word homework just sets him into a tizzy because he's thinking of all of this stuff and it's gonna, And so when we break it down, instead of saying homework, we say, all right, which thing are we gonna pick that's 10 minutes to start now? Do you see what I'm saying? Rather than saying the global homework. So we can start kind of break things down to easier things where we know that there's a manageable, tangible end that can help us motivate to start. Because sometimes starting is difficult for our kiddos and for me. I understand, especially when there's multi-levels. So if we can help break down the steps for them, that's one way we can help them motivate to do something. Another, let's see, what else did I want to say on that one? Okay. Motivating, so breaking it down. Now let's talk about in the moment. So if our kids, we're asking them to do something, or they're in a moment when they need to do something and they are afraid of what's going to do it, or they feel it's going to be painful, or if, it's going to be difficult, it can trigger that stress response to keep them safe. And that stress response is fight. So they're going to fight you on doing it. Freeze. They're just going to shut down. They're not going to do it. They're going to say, nope, I'm not doing it. Or fight, run away, do something else. Can't get me to do it. Okay. So knowing that our kids can be evoked with that. So bringing them back in when they're feeling safe. So when they're in this moment, we can't really negotiate with them. We can't try to bribe them. We can't, because they're in shutdown mode. I'm keeping myself safe, so I don't care what you say at this moment. So what we need to do is, usually in these moments, I try to calm my kids, work through it, but then later I try to break things down and figure what can we do next time, especially for those long-standing challenges for the kid that doesn't want to go to school every morning. Okay. So when our kids don't want to do something, it's much easier to get them to do something when you point out positives versus negatives. Okay. Now, what I mean is our kids are used to all the negatives of what they cannot do. Okay. And when they're doing something, so say it's assignment, we're trying to motivate them. I'm going to give you an example. So schoolwork, we're trying to motivate our kids to put a little bit more effort and into the schoolwork and be less resistant to doing homework. Okay, let's use that example. Okay, so not when they're having the meltdown, when they're saying, I don't want to do it. They're calm. We know homework's due tomorrow. We've got them in a quiet space where nothing else is going on to distract you or the kids, because that's the other thing. It's very hard to motivate our kids when we got a lot of other things going on. So less distraction. And we look at it and we break it down. So, okay, what's our list? Here's our list. So let's start with number one. So breaking things down. And when they get the first part and they make that first step towards it, celebrate that. Acknowledge that. When the kids, then that positive reinforcement, wow, I did that. All right, I can do it. Do you see what I'm saying? Sometimes I was like, okay, all right, next and next and next. Like, just starting, make sure you give them that immediate reward of great job and pointing out the goods. So if you have kids like mine who continue to miss grammatical errors and have a lot of edits that need help and going over or need a lot of support, when you're doing that, always point out what they are doing good too. And then suggestions, whatnot. Because are you motivated when you get told that you can't do something well? Are you motivated to do your best? Or are you just going to want to quit and say, why, this isn't even worth it? So that's why it's very important to bring that positive aspect to it and celebrate those things you can pick out of what they're doing well with. The 3 principles backed by neuroscience, which drive the mind and behavior, are social incentives. So comparing with what if others are doing it, okay, I'll do it as well. Having that peer, that's when in high school, sometimes having peer groups that are, oh, he did it, so all right, I can do it as well. Okay. Rewards, short-term and immediate. Long-term rewards are not good at all. has to be short term, whether it's that positive word, and anything short term. Okay. And progress monitoring. Now, this is a big one. This is really what I see makes the difference with our children in growing skill development. One is giving them the tools, right? Giving them the strategies to do the skill, but also starting it and seeing their progress. So progress monitoring, highlight the progress, focus on what they are doing, where they're going, and their efforts. So for instance, say you have a child, I'm going to keep it simple here, basketball, all right? You want them to be able to shoot. They want to play basketball, but they're not motivated because they're not good, but their friends are playing basketball, okay? And they're refusing to do it because they're bad. So what you can do is you can say, well, you know what? Let's practice 10 shots today, just 10, and let's see how many we make. And they say they do 10, and they make one. And then you monitor, great job, you did it. All right, tomorrow let's practice and do 12, and let's see how many we make. Do you see what I'm saying? And help them. That's a bad example. I'm trying to think of a better example with the progress. I can give an example what I used with my child. Posture was a very important thing for me to teach my kids, because I understand what posture does to our self-esteem, our arousal, our attention level. So one of the things with kids is when posture isn't good, it's usually because their abdominals aren't good. And when they're spending so much energy just keeping upright, it's harder to write. It really impacts other areas. So my oldest son, we were working on core strength. And so what we did is we showed his progress. So he was doing sit-ups. We would do 3 sets of different things. We do sit-ups, wall push-ups, and we were doing belly breathing. And he was watching his progress. And he started with maybe 3 sit-ups where he was needing help. And by the end, we were tracking the progress. By the end, he was able to do 10 by himself. Do you see how that's the reward? It wasn't too long where he was at, but the reward was every time he saw written down how he was doing better in that, it was giving him motivation to keep going. Just like us, if it's too hard and we don't see those immediate changes, we're just like, no, we want to stop. So progress monitoring is a great thing. So homework, all right, you know what? I know homework's challenging. Let's see, can we do 5 minutes without any arguing? That's what you want to work on, right? And great, you did it, 5 minutes without arguing. Let's see, can we do it 7 minutes tomorrow? Whatever you're trying to motivate them to do without arguing or resistance, break it down and you can monitor the progress. Great, today you did it for 7 minutes, tomorrow 10, great. So these are just some different examples. Our little kids, the sticker charts, that's why we, grade schools use those things, because they like to see, look where I'm at, look how many little dots I got. So let's get into the nitty-gritty now. Let's bring up some examples, if that's okay, and work through them. So using some of the things that I had mentioned, does anyone want to share a situation or an example where you are trying to motivate your child to do something? You all have to have.
Yeah, it's my grandson who's just started his 2nd year in school. He's age 5, and every day he's resistant. The first morning at school, he locked himself in the bathroom, refused to get dressed. Yeah, and so it goes on. So, I'm listening in to try to understand him. And maybe I can pass on some of the things you said to my daughter-in-law, my son. I'm thinking, how do you motivate that? I know it's a it's not just resistance, it's violent resistance. And it could take 2 or 3 adults to get him into the car, and sometimes that doesn't even work either. He'll just undo his seatbelt. But I'm kind of thinking, well, what short-term aim would help him to, and them, to get over this fear? It's a fear of going to school, all the things you've mentioned. Yeah.
And like I said, he's in fight or flight at that point. He is, something about school is triggering him where he does not feel good. Whatever it is, there is something about school. And I think, you know, working with the school to try to figure that out. So often we go straight to the behavior. How can we change the behavior without knowing what's causing the behavior? So he may not be able to say what specifically it is, but maybe the teacher, talking to the teacher and seeing, is there a certain time of the day that he shuts down? Or is there a specific class? Maybe it's music that he like refuses to go and he has a meltdown right before music. A lot of kids, my youngest hated music. And that's when he would have his meltdowns. So maybe it's one specific class. Does that make sense? So I would really try to work with the school. I don't know if that's possible. Some schools are easier than others. But, you know, think about how you would think if you had to go to work and someone was dragging you to work and 3 people. I mean, just put yourself in the shoes. Would you, I mean, once you get there, I mean, you know, he's got it. Whatever's uncomfortable, whatever is scary for him, that's what you got to hone in on, not so much. So that's why, you know, I say motivation, because motivation, we think it's what we need to motivate for work or to school or to do something. But what it is what do we need to do to figure out what's going on behind the scenes to help them through it? Does that make sense?
Okay. Yeah. Thank you.
So, thank you. So I would talk to the school and let them know that is challenging. Is it a new school?
No, it's his second year. So they had this on and off all of last year. Yeah. It's just going back now after the summer holidays has been particularly difficult. Yeah. But thank you. No, that's really helpful. Thank you.
Yeah. And I don't know, you know, as far as the second year, if he, you know, at the end of the day, you can talk about, you know, what did you like? What didn't you like today? And if you can, some kids can say that, some kids can't.
Right.
You know, that's something too, to just see if you can kind of dig a little deeper with him.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you.
You're welcome. But that's usually how I end up trying to solve the backside to make things like that easier, if possible. Now, obviously, changing schools or things like that, you know, I try to piece out where I can. A lot of times in the morning, I do things that are calming and soothing with the kids to get them ready. I don't know if that could help as well.
Yeah. That's part what they do, try to do that. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome. And incentives when he gets home. Wow, you did a great, like, and you can do that, you know, you can try to give him a reward. Like, hey, we want to help you. I know school's challenging, but this isn't helping every morning. Like, this is wasting, it's a lot of energy, you know, and that's really what I focus with my kids is, you know, that belief system, which, you know, sometimes a problem is made bigger because of our beliefs. So for instance, my son who didn't want to do homework for 3 hours, he got upset about it. When he actually did it, it was 10 minutes and it was easy, but he believed it was going to be harder. So that's the other thing, is seeing what their beliefs are and then changing it. So now he's okay with homework because he's like, I'm learning and I'm breaking it down. So he has a new way of looking at it. He changed his belief about homework, and now homework is easier. Okay? So with that, motivation is believing. Same thing with us. If we don't want to go to the gym and we believe it's going to be hard and we believe it's not going to be fun, we're not going to go. But if we change our belief and say, I have a friend going, it may be fun, and we try to look at the positive side, we're more likely to do it. So look at your kids' beliefs. That can also, if they're verbal enough to do that. Can anyone else give me an example? And I know some of these, it's he gets a treat every day he comes home from school. He loves popsicles. Great. Yeah, and you remind him when you drop him off about his treat. And that's great, you know, and that's this thing too, is looking forward to something at the end. That is, us as adults do that too, right? We had a really hard day. All right, I'm going to go home, you know, and whatever it is that you're going to treat yourself to, you know, think of that too. That's a great thing. And if you can't have your child choose within reason, but I try to tend not to use food all the time, because then you get into emotional eating and comfort eating. So just be mindful of that and try to switch it up. So it's not always food. So my kids, I mean, trust me, ice cream is the ultimate. So I will use that sometimes as a motivator, but I'll switch it up and say, all right, let's do something fun. All right, what do you want to do that, you know, fun that we'll spend time to do? You know, so something, just try to be, switch up the rewards. Could it be anxiety, being away from parents? Yeah, and that's the thing. So there could be so many reasons that there is definitely something, and it's something to get help with, because that's not a good way to start the day. And that's the other thing, is when we resist doing something, we use a lot of energy. And that, especially when kids go in that fight or flight, which is what he's in every morning, he is trying to run away, he is fighting going to school. That stress response takes a lot of energy and makes it a lot harder to then go through the day. And so definitely get some help with that, because there's a lot of other things more than just that one situation of getting to school that I feel is going to be challenging for them. And help with. Okay. Getting dressed on time, motivating. Okay, that's a good one. That's an easier one. So getting dressed on time. Timers, because I mean, our kids, I don't have a concept of time sometimes. I am like literally to the last minute. And so looking at dressed on time, you want them to get dressed by, say, 7:15, okay? And they're still eating breakfast. You know, start to look at what you're doing in the morning. You know, morning routines, that was this topic last month. And so look at that morning routine and block off how much time you're spending for each, and see where you can cut off a little time and add time for getting dressed. You can help her to problem solve, or is it him or her? I'm not sure. But you can help them to pick out their clothes at night. But I like having kids involved in how they can do things. So for instance, sit down, you can say, all right, getting dressed on time, we're running around, like what can we do in the night before to make things easier? So does that help, Sophie?
A bit, but the problem is he knows we will a routine in the morning, and he knows we allow for plenty of time, but even the time allowed sometimes is not enough. He's always distracted with other things, or he always find a good idea to do something else, and then 20 minutes later we're still nowhere near getting dressed, and there's that kind of pattern that is very difficult. 9.5.
9.5. Mm-hmm. Having a morning routine where he has to check things off, and then having a block where he gets to choose whatever he wants to do. Do you see what I'm saying? So there's that immediate reward. When I do this, I get this block. That may help because he knows, all right, I get this time, but I have to finish this, and this. Okay, let me show you one thing real quick here. So progress chart, right? And that's the other thing. So when you're giving him that cue, okay, we do this, and then you get your time to whatever. And then that way, you know, everything's done. So like this is a magnetic sort of checklist. So you can write here, getting dressed, you know, brushing teeth, whatever it is. And in the morning, he can check off. And he doesn't have to check it every one after he does it, but he has to make sure he does that. And then he gets more time to do whatever that last block is. Does that make sense? So there's your motivation, incentive too. If I get this done. Another thing that helps is timers. Because of the noise, the bell, all right, by this time, you have to get dressed or say something, you know, and give a 10-minute leeway just in case he doesn't make it. And once the timer goes, oh no, there's the timer, we better hurry up. Do you see what I'm saying? Kids with neurodiversity, and I'm not sure if your son has any neurodiversities, but that pressure is motivation. So that bell can be that motivator. So you can look at it two different ways. Yeah. Oh, great. Someone posted. Thank you, Tina, the checklist. Yeah. So, and it's great because when they go back to the checklist, it's not you telling them every 5 seconds to do something. It's external. It's just so much easier to not fight, you know, where are you on that checklist? And you can even have a time that you know, this should take this much because, you know, and 9, I mean, he's still a little bit young, but, you know, that may help to get into a routine because it becomes habit. I do this, then this, then this. It's much easier. And it does get easier. Janet. Mm-hmm.
Sorry, I've been attending, there are a lot of free webinars through Attitude Magazine. So I've been attending a whole different variety of them. And one of them was, and you probably know her name and all that, the concept is SOAR, SOAR, but she talked about having magnets and they're for each child with specific tasks. And so instead of saying, did you do this? Did you do that? Did you do this? It's like, did you do your magnet? So it kind of reduces the nagging. And then she said it's like the checklist, but so on Monday, say they're all on the left and they do their magnets, they put it on the right. And then on Tuesday, they go back and put it on the other side. So there's no extra work or whatever to set it all back to the beginning. And so that made a lot of sense. Some of us are like, well, I don't know how our teenagers are going to do this, but if you start earlier, it's, you know, it sounds great because the nagging is such an energy suck.
Yeah. And
it gives them a visual accomplishment.
And that's the thing too, is our kids are just trying their best, but they, you know, their minds are very active a lot of times and it can get distracted. I love that example. Thank you very much, Janet. And that's great. Attitude. I'm glad to know they have a lot of courses and if you have the, please share in the chat if you want to share any links, great.
I will.
Thank you. And I like that with the magnets, and that's a great external thing. And that's the thing is, how can we decrease the stress in the challenging situations, right? Now, older kids, sometimes I do have a checklist, like for my son who keeps forgetting to put deodorant on. You know, it's one of those. So how do I help? I put everything right next to his toothbrush. So everything's right there as a visual reminder to put it on. So I look at situations, what can I do for them to make it easier? restructure the situation or the environment by doing that, or giving those external checklists to remember. Great. And then that positive reinforcement, because when I started giving my son positive, like, you remember that on your own, the brain gets triggered. I like this feeling. I'm going to do it again. Positively reinforcing successes are so beneficial. Okay. All right. So what I will do is, after this, what I kind of edit a little bit in some of the key points, and then I send out a website that has, so if anyone shares any resources or any other tips and key points, I just make a little informational. It's almost like a blog. So you get the recording with key points, but you also get other additional information sometimes that we share. That'll be in there as well. So if you want that, if you signed up through my website, you automatically get that. But if you signed up through Eventbrite, if you want to put your email below, I can put you on the list and you can get the resources after the meetings, and then you can get reminders if you want to join, if there's other meetings with topics that are of interest. Yeah, motivation is a big thing. It's challenging, but like I said, honestly, if it all comes down to, I believe every child wants to do their best. It's just, and everyone does, it's just there are roadblocks. And when we figure out what that roadblock is and help to remove it, that's usually the key to helping motivate them to overcome. But it also helps to give them positive reinforcement for those little successes and empathetic to their challenges and how they feel in those challenging moments. Okay, great. Thank you very much, Janet. Does anyone have anything to add or comments, questions? Okay. All right. And the why is a very important thing. Why are children, finding those whys is something that really can help our kids. So for instance, if the kid's just distracted and needs that structure, that's where the magnet board comes in, because it gives them that focal point to come back to know what they're supposed to do next. Okay, so knowing their challenges and then bringing in the tools to help them through those challenges are keys. And Attitude is a great resource that has a lot of great information for children who have attention difficulties and individuals with attention difficulties. So thank you very much, Janet, for sharing that. Okay, all right. Well, thank you everyone for joining. Janet, anything to?
I was just going to say the webinars and podcasts are free. You don't have to subscribe to the magazine necessarily, but the magazine I think is pretty useful as well. And there's some tips for them for even if you're not on the spectrum, and it also covers all ages.
Great, thank you. And that's the thing. I feel like all of us could use these these strategies to help us to be organized. I mean, life is, I remember it's very distracting, and to hone in the focus. I remember when news was just one news thing. Do you remember that? Before they had the headlines at the bottom and then the things at the top, and that, we're so bombarded by so many things. And I think a lot of the strategies that Attitude does give, it's helpful in so many different ways. Great, thank you. All right, well, and remember, be in your kids' shoes. Much easier to identify challenges if you can switch your perspective into why does the resisting and why do they have to do this and getting in your head, which is very easy. That's the immediate thing we do. Switch into their shoes and how they're feeling and try to see it from their side. It's much easier to solve a problem understanding it in that manner. Okay. All right, everyone. Next month is increasing positive mental and physical energy. So we're going to talk about that. Yeah, because I think all of us, energy is a good thing, but sometimes our kids, especially stress, is that negative energy, right? And how can we switch to where we're mentally doing things and changing our habits that are increasing our energy rather than draining our energy, and our kids vice versa. So we're going to kind of go into that next month. All right. Well, thank you, everyone. It's been a pleasure. Sue, good luck. And I'm going to put my web address here. I'm going to, there is my web address and my email. If you have any other questions, feel free to reach out. Oh, you're welcome. I try. I know it's challenging. So with those little tidbits to make things easier, it's helpful. And thank you very much, Janet, for sharing. Like I said, there's many experts in this group. All right. And I know you guys have spent a lot of time researching. I think that's part, if you have a child who has challenges, I think we spend a third of our time researching how we can help them. So thank you for sharing other things that you guys have found. Well, thank you, everyone. You have a great rest of your Monday. My Monday's ending. I don't know if you're in the States, yours is starting. So you guys have a wonderful day and hope to see you again next month.